Sales and operation planning, or S&OP, has been the very bedrock of business planning for at least the last 2 decades. But despite its popularity, it is not without criticism. And here to explore them with me today, Lokad founder Joannes Vermorel. Joannes, welcome. So S&OP has been around for a very long time, actually. But when we talk about it in 2023, what does it mean?
S&OP is essentially a corporate process to create company-wide alignments in companies that have extended supply chains. Mm-hmm. And the basic, I would say, motivation, the underlying reason why people want to engage in this sort of process is that if you have a large company with an equivalently large supply chain that deals in physical goods, then to make it simple, you need to sell what you produce, and you need to produce what you're about to sell. And this sort of alignments need to happen, and due to the fact that you have like many stakeholders, potentially many divisions, it is non-trivial, and thus there is I would say a popular recipe nicknamed S&OP, mm-hmm. Sales and Operation, to do just that. But it's fundamentally a set of corporate practices to address this core problem of alignment / synchronization / proper cooperation within the company to achieve basic business goals.
Okay, so Joannes, when you say like the alignment process, specifically you mean insights or you mean sales figures? I mean, what exactly do you mean by alignment between the different functions?
So the alignment is, at least from the S&OP perspective, mm-hmm. is mostly about a quantitative alignment. So there are plenty of sort of alignments. People can try to align themselves on a certain vision for mm-hmm, the business, yeah. on a certain culture, on a certain way of doing the business. This is not what S&OP is about. Okay. S&OP is really about the quantitative alignment. When I say quantitative, I mean how much. How mm-hmm. much. So if you think that you're selling widgets, question, should the factory produce 1,000 widgets, 1,000,000 widgets, mm-hmm. 1,000,000 a week, 1,000,000 a month, 1,000,000 a quarter? That's should you expand the factory so that you can produce more? Mm. Should you shrink the factory and close maybe a production line because you need less? Do you need a bigger warehouse, a smaller warehouse? Do you need more transport capability, less transport capabilities, and where, etc.? So there are plenty of questions where the various moving parts mm-hmm. Of your companies needs to size up. Mm-hmm, yeah. the sort of efforts and commitments, and due to the fact that supply chains, whenever you say supply chains, you have delays, so you have like a sequence of delays. That's all what those lead times are about. It means that a lot of decisions have to be made ahead of time, and thus the company must remain consistent with itself. If you've decided 6 months ago that you were about to produce 1,000,000 widgets. Mm-hmm. Well, now 6 months later, the widgets have been produced, and you have to make sure that you can sell them. That in between all the various decisions had also been properly made. 1,000,000 were produced. You had to store them somehow. You had to transport them somehow, etc., etc. And thus, that's what I would say. This is underneath the umbrella term S&OP, the sort of problems that are tentatively trying to be addressed through those processes are those, I would say, company-wide alignment / synchronization / coordination. And we are really talking about the quantitative stuff. Things like aligning I would say, company-wide all divisions on the same values. For example, a certain way of paying attention to your job, mm-hmm. That some companies have very strong cultures around what does it mean to work for this company. This is not what S&OP is about. S&OP is really about the mundane quantitative alignment, not having everybody on board with the same values, for example.
Okay, so when we're talking, again, we're squarely within the remit of quantitative figures. So we're talking about the hard numbers, what we're going to sell, what we're going to build. How exactly do you align very disparate departments on this? I mean, that's surely a qualitative procedure? I mean, is that meetings? Is that emails? Is there software for that? How is that handled?
So the classical view on S&OP, and that's, so you see, we have a problem statement. The problem statement is there is possibly half a dozen divisions, possibly more, that have to take decisions ahead of time compared to, to a certain, to a future that is not perfectly known. And S&OP is this process that supposedly is supposed to provide an answer to those divisions so that they can take these decisions ahead of time. Now, the way S&OP approaches this problem is very, very specific. Essentially, S&OP propose that teams are going to collaborate to establish a unified company-wide forecast. There are different ways to go about it, but it's really what it's about. It's a unified forecast for the company, and not any kind of forecast, an incredibly specific forecast. It's going to be a time series, a point time series forecast. So literally, the company is going to decide on a certain granularity. It can be the product, can be the SKU. There will be a granularity in terms of what do we measure, but there will be also a time granularity, which can be per day, per week, per month, per quarter, possibly. But so the company picks a granularity according to S&OP, and then forecasts are made and potentially iterated upon through the S&OP. And the idea of S&OP is that since there are many shareholders, all those people have to meet and discuss and revise, and the output of S&OP is this unified forecast for the company. This is literally the deliverable of the S&OP process. It is a company-wide forecast, which is then considered as the truth, the baseline, and everybody has to do what they have to do to meet this target, which is just, it's not just a statistical forecast in the sense of being a number that is accurate about the future. It is also a target for everybody as well.
So on that point, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you just said that people will collaborate, or under the S&OP umbrella, people will collaborate on the demand forecasting. Now, that obviously is a quantitative process. Are you suggesting that people in this articulation of S&OP will weigh in? Like if I'm sales, we're going to sell more than that, we're going to sell less than that. How exactly is there collaboration in a very quantitative process like demand forecasting?
So again, you should not, from the S&OP perspective, yes, the numbers are, technically a forecast, but in practice for the various teams involved, it is a commitment. So it's a very different sort of numbers. Yes, it's a time series, but from the S&OP perspective, it is a commitment. So that means that people commit their division to be able to fulfill this target. So these commitments mean something different for every division. If we have a product and we say next month 1,000 units, if you're from the sales division, it means that you commit yourself to make this happen. There will be orders that will be from clients that will be roughly equal to 1,000 units. If you are from the warehousing division, that means that, let's say, 1,000 units, well, we have the capacity to store those 1,000 units. So that means that it's literally, we do what it takes so that when those 1,000 units will flow, we have the storage capacity to make it happen. And then production, they would say we have acquired the raw materials so that we can produce those 1,000 units. So again, those numbers are as much forecasts as they are commitments. And as part of those discussion collaboration, it's not, the statistical aspect that dominates. It is more like the agreements on the commitments that dominates.
And these agreements, or the unified vision that you described, this is reached once, let's say a quarter, once per year. What's a typical timeline or cycle for this kind of process?
When we have to consider the timeline, we have those. We have this problem statement, the need for alignment, which is when you look at the simplest possible solution, that will be craft numbers that are commitment/forecast, but they are more on the commitment side. And people need to meet, and then you want to keep this information fresh. Something makes sense. So most companies would want, ideally, to be able to revisit that, let's say, weekly. The reality is that S&OP is invariably something that devolves into a bureaucratic effort, and thus it's very, very slow. And thus, the vast majority of companies have achieved kind of quarterly refresh of their S&OP plan. They nearly all dream of going to monthly updates, but the reality is that it's so slow that it's an immense struggle to get a monthly refresh, and the weekly refresh or even the daily refresh is just completely outside the realm of what sounds possible.
So people, in theory, aspire to meet on a monthly basis to revise this unified vision. Are we hitting these numbers? What to continually tweak the formula, as it were?
I mean, we have to revisit again. Why do we have any delay? You know, that's when people say S&OP, again, the problem is that S&OP, it's by implication. So we just say, okay, we have this problem. We jumped on the very, very first most obvious solution, which was, okay, let's collaboratively have a unified forecast / target / commitments that bring the whole company together, which is the simplest idea that you can possibly have. It's not actually the best or the most efficient. It's just
the most expedient.
The most expedient and naive way to go about it. Okay. And now you end up with a problem, which is if you decide to execute it that way, you end up with something that needs to be refreshed, yes, obviously. But in practice, it is very difficult to have this process iterate, to have a full refresh of this process on a monthly basis. And thus, most companies only succeed at doing that on the quarterly basis. But if we step back about the problem statement, the problem statement was to have alignment within the company. Why should this thing be anything but real time? There is no reason. Those things could happen, could be happening, every day, every hour. Why do we have a delay on that? You see, there are plenty of things that are incredibly difficult and that can be done in milliseconds. If you take, let's say, I want to compute the value of let's say, the cosine function, it's something very complicated. I mean, until a century ago, you had to be a university professor to do this sort of calculation. Nowadays, a pocket calculator or a smartphone can do millions or billions of those calculations per second, but it can be done, in milliseconds. So, okay, the question is, we have that. Why should it take time at all? And you see, when we think about the S&OP, we went from the simplest of the simplest, fine, maybe, not fine in reality, but let's pause for a second on that. And then you end up with a process that is very, very slow and where it's an immense struggle to just even reach a refresh rate of 1 refresh per month. But you see, that's if we look at the problem statement, the initial problem statement is need for synchronization / alignment / cooperation. These sort of things would be better done by the hour, actually. There is no reason not to do that, except if your process is just incapable of doing it.
Well, just to push back a little bit, because for an S&OP advocate who isn't present, they might say, well, while yes, doing it hourly would be great, there are certain qualitative insights or market insights within specific departments that are difficult to translate into a numerical form, and thus it's easier to do that in a meeting. And that's why they would have meetings, to relay to you in finance or in sales, here's what we're going to do, the warehouse is going to be shut down, we're decreasing it. Like, are there certain things that just have to be communicated orally rather than easily expressed numerically?
That's where there is, I think, very profound misunderstanding about what you can communicate at all through humans. You see, humans are low bandwidth creatures. The amount of information that can go in and out a human body is, in terms of of really, if you look at the information theory, in terms expressed in shannons, let's say bits. So how many bits of information can you have in and out a human person? It doesn't matter if this person is like super smart, super educated, has tons of insights and whatnot. The reality is that per second, we are talking of literally a tiny few bits per second. Mm-hmm. That's it. So people would say, well, what does it have anything to do with the problem? Well, it turned out that large companies are like super complex. It is, when we are talking of companies that are selling tens of thousands of products or hundreds of thousands of products that have millions of SKUs, the amount of information that needs to flow through the company is very large. We are talking of megabytes of information. And potentially, in the very large companies, gigabytes of information. Irreducible information. That's just the raw information that needs somehow to transit through the company. And what people don't necessarily realize is that you can't convey this information. Let's say sales cannot communicate verbally all the information there is to be known about the sales to the production division. It is literally, we are talking in a large-scale company of at least megabytes of information. And just in terms of scale, even if you do a 3-hour meeting, we are talking of kilobytes of information that will flow. So you see, we have like 3 orders of magnitude of discrepancy between the amount of information that can flow in a meeting
and the amount that needs to
and the amount of information that is required to flow. So what is happening in reality? Well, the information is flowing, but through Excel spreadsheets. The Excel spreadsheets do contain the megabytes of information that needs to flow. And thus, it really begs the question of what is it that you're really communicating? And again, those numbers, so in the end, the problem is that people discuss those numbers, but those numbers are incredibly, thin-grained, and there is tons of information that, by design, cannot be discussed. And I think that that's also part of the S&OP problem, is that the S&OP was this sort of paradigm emerged at least 50 years ago in a world that was simpler, in a world where companies had at least 10 times less products and very frequently 100 times less products. Again, 40 years ago, my parents were working at Procter & Gamble. Procter & Gamble worldwide at the time, that was like 100 products. Nowadays, it is like 20,000 references, at least. So see, it was simpler times where there was much fewer references and much fewer complexity. Again, if we look at the way a very large company, Procter & Gamble, was set up 4 decades ago, it was one country, one plant. And then you distribute to, let's say, 10 warehouses that are your national retail chain. So if you take, again, 4 decades ago, a gigantic company like Procter & Gamble, 100 references, one plant, 10 warehouses that will be the Carrefour and all the large retail chain, and you ship 1 or 2 full truck a day to all of those warehouses, and this is it. And every country is kind of the same, and so you have a supply chain that is like super simple. It's not the supply chains that we have nowadays. Nowadays, supply chains have grown immensely in complexity. We are talking now routinely, even for companies that are nowhere as large as a company like Procter & Gamble, we are talking of tens of thousands of products, hundreds of suppliers, a lot of various modes of transportations. Some suppliers are going to be close, some are going to be far. They might be not like one channel like it used to be, where it's just delivered to one type of clients. Warehouses sitting just behind hypermarkets. You have like half a dozen channels. You might have the e-commerce in the middle that complicates everything. So this complexity permeates now all the supply chains. There might still be a few companies that says we do 10 billion euro worth of turnover with only 20 products, and we have only like 10 clients, and it's like super simple, and we only source locally. Yes, there might be some businesses that are like that. I don't think that it's a majority. I think if there are still any business that operate like that, I'm not even sure that we can still find businesses that would say, we do 10 billion, we are only local, and we have 10 clients that are also local, and we source everything locally, etc. I'm not sure that there is many businesses that would qualify for this sort of things nowadays. I think companies, once they reach this sort of size, they are super complex nowadays. And thus, the problem is that this S&OP paradigm was something that made sense for this low complexity world, where through, again, a few kilobytes of information, you had everything that was needed. But nowadays, we're talking of megabytes, and information cannot flow. And so people do the next best thing, which is to go through spreadsheets. So the information is mediated through software. And by the way, this is the way it works. I mean, nowadays, there is no company that is probably in Europe or North America that is above 100, let's say, $1 million turnover that doesn't have an ERP or that, some kind of digital backbone for their supply chain and their operations. So all the information is mediated through software. It can be mediated with ERPs or through spreadsheets, but it goes through the spreadsheets, which means that what is it that is truly going to be discussed through those meetings? And in my experience, and I've seen probably over 200 companies, in those S&OP processes, no matter how good the initial intentions were, they devolved into super bureaucratic affairs where it's basically some sort of tug of war sort of discussions where salespeople want to have the targets as low as possible so that they can exceed their commitment and get their bonuses. Production wants to have the targets super high so that they can invest in their capacity, and it will be easy for them to produce whatever is asked for them. And same thing. So essentially, it developed in tug of war where people defend their turf. It becomes very political, and thus, in order to prevent cheating or abuse, companies put even more processes in place, making the things that was too bureaucratic in the first place even more bureaucratic, and in the end, those I would say S&OP processes are super slow. As we said, most companies, it's refresh only once per quarter. And so you end up with numbers that are always available too late, and everybody, it's a very big charade. Everybody pretends that it produces useful numbers while every single division operates independently of those numbers in practice, because they need those, whatever numbers they need about the future, they need those numbers to be refreshed on a daily basis for plenty of reasons. So those numbers are produced, S&OP numbers are produced at great cost. And in the end, every single division just mind their own business and do it their own way anyway. And in practice, the information is flowing through software. So it's mediated. It's not flowing through those meetings anyway.
Well, now I want to summarize a bit there because you've dropped a lot of little pins in that. And correct me if I'm wrong, but based on your description, S&OP goes back to, let's say, the 80s, so about 40-ish years, at a time where companies were operating on a scale of complexity of, let's say, 100 products. Fast forward 40 years, there's a couple of orders of magnitude more complexity in terms of products being offered. Yet, companies are now less agile despite the 40 years of technological advancement between the birth and present day. Is that a fair summary of that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say S&OP dates back probably a century ago. I would, if I had to really date S&OP, I would say this is, again, with the emergence of the modern 20th century company, so a little bit more than a century, let's say with the emergence of the modern large-scale company, companies like the General Electric, Ford, those companies that at the time were fairly unique because that was pretty much sort of first time that you had like very large private undertaking. Before that, if you were to seek anything that would be 100,000 people, the only sort of places where you would find, 100,000 people that works together would be the armies. You know, with the beginning of the 20th century is the birth of the large modern company where you have like tens of thousands of people who jointly work together for something that is not the army. And you can even find, you know, tidbits of that in the terms when you say chief executive officer, or all those terms, they were borrowed from the army because that was the only place where you had this sort of large-scale hierarchies. I mean, the army and maybe the church.
But specifically in the context of business, though.
So I would say as soon as you had that, I'm pretty sure that even if you look at the General Electric 1920, I'm pretty sure they had internally something that was very much like S&OP. Again, people were producing light bulbs, some other people were storing light bulbs, some other people were selling light bulbs. I'm pretty sure all those people were meeting once in a while to decide. But the question was, how many different references did they had? And I'm pretty sure if you look at the time, we were talking of hundreds, maybe 1,000.
Significantly fewer than today.
And I'm pretty sure, I don't know how many product references that a company like General Electric has nowadays, but I would bet that they have over 100,000. And they operate in probably over 100 countries. So it's very, very different from the company that was General Electric 100 years ago. So back to S&OP, you see, again, the way I see S&OP, it was just something that was kind of formalized. And I would say 4 decades ago, it was formalized. And why was it formalized? That's the question of why was it formalized. Because it was productified so that it could be sold by consultants. So you see, so those sort of things were done naturally. Again, that is pretty much S&OP, the way you see it. It's the emergent process that you get in a large company when you just let people figure out whatever solution they can find, you know, when they are in a rush and they don't really spend much time to any kind of elaborate thinking about the way you should even approach those sort of things. So, and the reality is that unless you have like modern computers, you don't really have alternatives. So probably, you know, this sort of pre-S&OP, so something that was not, you know, packaged as something that could be sold by consultants, but let's say this pre-S&OP from 1920 to 1980. Well, that's for those 60 years. That was pretty much the only option available. You know, computers at the time were not really capable of providing any kind of alternative answer. So you had that, and this is it. And that was just reasonable. And then the game changed progressively in the 80s because computers started to become like super powerful. And it becomes like dramatically different starting from the year 2000s because with the internet connectivity, it really dramatically changed the way you could think not only about processing information, but also the flow of information. Just because you had this commoditized internet. Internet, yes, is dating from the 70s, but it took some time until it was really commoditized in the sense of being like super cheap to have like corporate data that just flow through this network. And I would date the age where it becomes very, very cheap to flow business data through the internet at the year 2000.
Well, if the collaborative approach, like the in-person collaborative bureaucratic approach, you're not an advocate of, okay, well then what exactly would the software requirements be to implement an effective version of this?
So you see, the thing is, again, you have a problem statement. People tend to confuse problem and solution. S&OP is a solution. This is not the problem. What is the problem? The problem is alignment, synchronization / coordination. So you have the problem statement. If I go to the naked problem statement, the problem statement is half a dozen or more of decisions, half a dozen or more of divisions have every single day thousands of decisions to make. That's the raw problem statement. So the salespeople will be which prospect do I pursue? Which client do I recontact to make an offer? The pricing division would be for every single product that we are selling, should I raise or lower the price point every single day? If you're dealing with replenishment every single day, what do I need to order, etc. So this is the problem statement, is all of those decisions, and we are talking, again, if we're looking at a large company, we're talking of millions of decisions per day. And this is the flow of the supply chain. Those decisions are very repetitive. And they need to be aligned because there is a whole sequence. You buy the raw material, you produce, you transport, you store, and then you transport again to do the final delivery, etc. So there is a whole sequence of that. But it's very repetitive, and that's why we have a flow, and that's why we have this supply chain. Okay. So the naked statement is, how do we achieve this collaboration or this alignment for all this all those decisions? That's the naked problem statement. The solution, which says let's have meetings for that, it's one possible solution, but I would say it's a very, very crappy solution. It's going to fail on so many fronts. I mean, again, the meetings, it's low bandwidth. So there is very little information that can possibly flow through that. So if you think that you can create alignment through those meetings in terms of those quantitative decisions, no, it doesn't. It doesn't work. And consultants would say, oh, but we have to align on the strategy. And I would say, if you think that S&OP is about to discuss strategy, you've never been to S&OP meetings. S&OP is really tug of war on numbers. If there are, if people have to agree on a shared strategy, this is not the S&OP division that is going to do that. And by the way, I've rarely seen processes that are so little concerned with high-level strategy than S&OP. So S&OP is absolutely not about these strategical things. It's not in an S&OP meeting that you decide whether you should move your brand toward premium, charge more, and have more quality. This is not in an S&OP meeting that you discuss these sort of things, because you see, that would be a possibility where you say, if we go premium, will you be able to sell it at a higher price? That would be a question for the sales. And then if we go premium, you could ask the production, will you be able to have higher quality? And et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, but this is not the sort of question that gets realistically. So you see, those sort of strategic questions are absolutely not the sort of questions that are dealt with in S&OP meetings. S&OP meetings are quantitative, so people want to agree on numbers. So this is the kind of the opposite of the strategic questions. So, and the deliverable is this kind of one unified forecast, which has, again, nothing to do with strategy. Now, so the difficulty is that once you have, it's very difficult to think of a problem without thinking solution. So people are kind of stuck. You say, okay, but if we remove that, what do we put in place? Yeah. And here I would say probably several answers, but the first answer would be something that is not especially nice. It would say, once you remove a cancer, what is the surgeon putting in place in the patient? I would say most companies could remove their S&OP division and it would just work exactly the same. Because again, the reality is that information flow, but not through this S&OP process. It flows through the software layers that exist in the company, and this is it. Because that's not, and just to give you the sort of ideas is that, how does the sales team generate the forecast? Well, the sales team take the sales of last year, they remove 20%, and they say this is a new target, and then they are going to exceed they are going to exceed expectations because, well, the company is going to be more or less doing what they did last year, but since they have lowered the ball by sandbagging by 20%, they are going to exceed their targets. And then production, they do the same thing. They look at the sales history, they see what was needed last year, they do their own calculation, own forecast, and that's how they do it. And yes, there is a meeting with an S&OP process where everybody, do a tug of war on the numbers, but at the end of the day, all those numbers are discarded. And the way I know it is that once at Lokad, we have We have frequently audited, frequently. We did that at least a dozen times. We did audit the numbers that were produced by S&OP processes. There was like absolutely stunning errors in the forecast. Not in the sort of statistical error, errors where numbers were absolutely wrong because there was like data integration issues. And those errors, so that the numbers were completely off by sometimes several orders of magnitude. And it had never been bothered anybody, because actually the reality was nobody was even using those numbers. So you can have numbers that are off by a factor of 1,000 and nobody even noticed because nobody is even trying to use those numbers. And that's where I say it's a charade, because if you can produce numbers that are off by a factor of 1,000 and it doesn't create any adverse consequences, it has no adverse consequences for the company, it means that nobody is actually using those numbers. So accuracy doesn't matter. It's just, it is mostly irrelevant.
Well, I do want to check a comment that was made. Again, in terms of the sandbagging, we can't speak for a process and say that everyone who's going to participate, or even the majority of people who will participate, will have bad intentions. But it certainly sounds reasonably fair to say that in a bureaucratic process like that, it opens the door to inefficiencies. Now, you can drop into that bucket the idea of sandbagging, bad intentions, whatever. But as a system, the more people you involve in it, the more collaborative you make it, you increase the surface area for that kind of inefficiencies.
Yeah, but again, we have to go back to the physical reality. And when I say physical, I mean informational reality. So we have a problem that is about processing information. Mm-hmm. This alignment, coordination, extra. This is not physical problems like I want to move this box from this location to another location. This is purely, information in, information out. This is an informational problem. Now, the question is, how much, bandwidth do we need to solve this problem? And I know it's very strange because people would not think of it that way. But what I'm saying is that it's a problem that needs to flow megabytes of information in a mid-sized company, and probably if you're looking at very large companies, we are talking of gigabytes of information. This is it. That's the problem statement. So you can't bypass. This is like the hard reality. You can't. It doesn't matter what you wish the situation to be. This is what needs to happen. So this information, and we are counting megabytes, if not gigabytes, need to flow. This is the only way to solve the problem. So if you think that having a process that is driven by people to flow this information is going to solve it, it's not. It's not. And so if you have a process that looks to be driven by people, that seems to be solving the problem, my answer is that it's not through people that information flows. It's not possible. It flows through the software, possibly through spreadsheets. Again, spreadsheets, you can very easily have megabytes of information flowing through spreadsheets. But the information is not flowing through people. That's my statement. It's not just not possible. Show me a company where you can have like megabytes of information that per month or per quarter flow through people. I do not see that as a reality. So it flows through the software. And thus, my point is that once you acknowledge that, then you need to acknowledge that whatever solution you will find will be fundamentally a software solution, because that's how the information is flowing anyway. It cannot flow through people. So if you say, oh, people are smart, people are inside, I would say yes, but they don't have the bandwidth. It's just not possible unless you literally take one planner per SKU, and then it becomes possible. And again, if we go back to General Electric 1920, I would not be surprised that at the time they had one inventory manager per SKU. That would be very much the sort of things that companies would do at the beginning of the 20th century. So yes, if you have like one employee per SKU, yes, you can do that. But you've solved the bandwidth problem by just having a number of people that would, according to the modern standards, be downright insane. No company nowadays could afford to have like one person per SKU to manage inventory, and yet this is what was done a century ago. So you see, that's again this sort of bandwidth problem.
It occurs to me that potentially even a software alternative to this, so something that consciously limited the amount of human touch points, would still be predicated upon at least one person per department inputting this information. And isn't that still vulnerable to sandbagging? Like, couldn't I just mess around with the numbers?
First, let's clarify. Again, we are reasoning by implication. Mm-hmm. I say that the easiest thing was, and simplest, was to have an agreement on a unified future that becomes a commitment for everybody. Mm-hmm. That's the intuitive and easy solution, but it's not a good solution. It's a terrible solution when you think of it. Why is that? Because those humans who have low bandwidth, you're going to ask them to communicate information about stuff that change all the time. And this is the opposite of what needs to be done. You see, I know it's a semi-philosophical problem, but it's a very important one. If you have humans in the loop, you need to focus on what do not change. You see, if there are insights to be acquired, this is about the fundamentals, what do not change. At school, you do not get, just think about what, for example, school does, a primary school. The teacher do not walk into the classroom and spend the day teaching children about the weather forecast. You know, the teacher could enter the room and tell the children about the temperatures that are going to happen in every single city in France for the next month. And we could repeat that every single day. The teacher would come to the classroom and say, we have those 20 cities, here are the temperature for the next 30 days. Would the children learn anything? No. That would be an attempt to focus on what changes. So the teacher does the exact opposite of that. If he has to teach and communicate something, he will or she will focus on what do not change. Arithmetics, mm-hmm. Grammar, poetry, whatever, things that do not change. So this is very important, is that if you have humans in the loop, you need to focus on communicating the things that do not change. Why should sales reiterate, the stuff that, businesses usually change slowly, especially when they're large. So why would you have sales reiterate their position every quarter to re-say the exact same thing and whatnot? This is nonsense. There is no value in doing that. And to get the agreement on this unified forecast, this is the fallacy. This forecast is something that is going to be numerically unstable. We have market erraticities, also numbers kind of change a little bit all the time, but it's just noise. Just again, if we go back to this product example, people consume shampoos. For the last half a century, people have been consuming shampoos. It's a very stable market. Yes, there is fluctuations. Some brands rise and fall and whatnot, but it's mostly noise. Companies have been in the business of selling shampoo for a very long time. Yes, there will be new products that are introduced. They have introduced dozens of new products over the last decades, etc., etc. But so all those things are noise. The way you would like to deal with, let's say, a market like shampoo, there are fundamentals, and if there is one things to be communicated, it will be about that. So if we go back to this S&OP, the problem is that as part of the solution, we have said that the solution had to go through shooting for unified forecast. We have said that unified forecast / commitment. And I really challenge that it's the proper way to do that. And I would go, and my proposition would be, this is complete nonsense. If you bring people to the room, and I would very much agree that there is value to bring people to those rooms together, it is absolutely not to get an agreement on those numbers. Those numbers change all the time. This is complete nonsense to waste everybody's time to get an agreement or even share insights on those numbers. This is complete waste of time. People will, realistically, they will not be able to convey information. Again, the granularity, not enough bandwidth. If you do the math, how many people, how many hours, how many words can be spoken, how many kilobytes can circulate, way too low. So, but insights are very important, and those can be communicated. Let's give an example of a very important insight. Let's say you sell, for example, again, back to this example, Procter & Gamble, you sell diapers. Diapers are critical for hypermarkets because that's one of the sort of products where when the hypermarket has a stock out on diapers, clients, customers, young parents go nuts. They want their diaper, and they are very sticky in terms of brand. Just because the baby is used to that, whatever. So that's the sort of products that is quite expensive, quite pricey, and it's the sort of product if you're out of stock for a specific brand of diapers, parents would just go to another hypermarket and do their weekly shopping. So the hypermarket would not only lose the sale of the diapers, they would lose the entire basket. And they might actually lose the clients forever, because then they get used to go to another hypermarket and they never come back. So this is a sort of super important insight. Like diapers, we need super high quality of service. Okay, this is a very important insight, but do we need to reiterate that at every meeting? Are we going to revisit quarterly the fact that diapers are a product where quality of service need to be super high? No, that's complete nonsense. I mean, yes, at some point we need to have this being really conveyed, and that might be a meeting once where this information is conveyed. But then for the next meeting, we are not going to endlessly reiterate the same thing. That would be a very poor use of the time of everybody to restate what has already been stated and should be embedded in the company in a different way. So if you have new classes of products or market evolution that change the way you should think about quality of service, you can revisit that, and that would be an opportunity to bring people together in a room to discuss for example, what does quality of service for diapers mean in the age of e-commerce? It will be a new question that needs to be addressed, maybe once, and maybe revisited every couple of years. But that's not a cause to revisit this sort of question on a quarterly basis, and certainly not on a monthly or weekly basis. So back to those meetings, you see S&OP, due to the fact that as part of the recipe that is being proposed, say those meetings, the deliverable is this unified forecast, the things that get discussed are all the wrong things. And what I'm saying is that if we say that the information flow through software by necessity, if there are meetings, it's certainly not to discuss those quantitative aspects. The quantitative aspects, they flow through the software. Humans do not have the bandwidth to do it any other way. So it's wishful thinking to think that humans can deal with the numbers. The numbers, or you will cheat. You will deal with numbers that are so aggregated that
it loses any insight.
It's not actionable. If I tell you that that a company like Procter & Gamble is going to do this amount of sales in this region, if you don't disaggregate per SKU, I mean, it's not the level of information that is, and this level of information is absolutely not sufficient to take your decisions. So yes, you have your high level information, but then when you want to translate, you can't turn a monthly sales forecast into daily decisions. There is just not enough information. You need to have like the fine decomposition, and you can't turn a category forecast, let's say 1 million units to be sold in the diapers category, into the split for the hundreds of SKUs that you have to maintain within that category. Okay, so again, information, the numbers will flow through software no matter what, and humans, they will be able for high level information, but they are not numerical in nature. They're qualitative, and that's very interesting. There is a lot of value, but again, if we look at what S&OP is absolutely not used, and I've never seen that in any company, to circulate qualitative information. I've never seen that, or never seen that under the name of S&OP.
Well, that's the thing, and that's one of the benefits of the longer form conversations, because at the start it sounded very much as if you were somewhat against the idea of people being involved in any sort of meetings whatsoever, but it sounds more like there's an objection to the formalization of waste that comes from S&OP. For example, you're taking people who are not geared towards this kind of analysis and formally putting them in meetings where they have to discuss the kind of numbers that change on a regularity that they can't possibly be expected to keep up with.
Yes, you see, the problem is that the deliverable, you bring people together to deliver numbers. And that's where I say this is complete nonsense. This is absolutely wrong. This is not the proper way to do it in year 2023. It was, and this is not even new. 20 years ago, it would already have been mistakes. So you see, the problem is that it's literally you projecting a paradigm that is like a century-old paradigm, which is, again, think of it, General Electric, 1920. People get in a room and get those commitments because they are selling like 50 products, and yes, if you have like such a small product range, you can have this quantitative information that flow through people. But nowadays, with the complexity, it's not possible anymore. So I say it is a waste of time. People know it, and that's, by the way, the reason why S&OP devolved into a bureaucratic nightmare. It's because this is pointless. People know it. And so what is the natural evolution in a company when you have something that is completely pointless? Do you think that the people that are, the most engaged, the most committed, the sharpest, the most, the most valuable people for the company wants to be part of that? They know that it's not going to be a game changer. They know that this thing is mostly a bureaucratic thing that just happens for whatever reason. And so, there is a self-selection mechanism where, over time, and due to the fact also so first you have this thing where it's not going to attract, the brightest, things. That's just, again, it's, I've met, plenty of companies, and I can tell dozens of cases where people, a CEO told me, you know what, in the sales, we had at some point some people who did magic, and that made us fantastically rich, or that was, decades ago. Or we managed to support a production process that nobody could replicate at the same price. And so we crushed the competition because we had our patented process. We could have a quality that was impossible to replicate at the same price, and we just crushed the competition. Or, same some of stories where people say, we did that and we crushed the competition. I've never heard of any company that says we had a planning process that was so good that we crashed the competition. I've never heard of that. And I've never heard of any company that would tell me we overcompete our clients on planning through S&OP. So you see, again, so bottom line is, I'm just saying that it is wrong. People did project this paradigm that is a low bandwidth paradigm. So channel those quantitative information through people. It works with low complexity, and this is a low bandwidth solution to a low complexity problem. And now we live in a high complexity problem that needs a high bandwidth solution. And that's my point. And if people meet, there is value, but when people exchange, you see, that's what sort of value do you have? It is to convey things that resist quantitative analysis. If you bring people into the room, it's to discuss, for example, what does the quality of service means for diapers in the age of the e-commerce. This is something that is not about numbers. It is an important problem, but it is a problem that even resists to a large degree a direct quantitative analysis. There is no easy translation. You can't summarize this problem into 3 numbers. And if you can, it is probably not something that is easy. It will require a lot of efforts to finally produce those few numbers. But there will be like an intense intellectual process to make really sure that those numbers really mean what you think they mean. And so my point is that this need for alignment is important, but the deliverable is all wrong. And I think that's the core about S&OP, is that it focuses on the wrong deliverable.
Well, the thing is, and I understand all the criticism that has been made, but to give the devil their due, S&OP is pretty common amongst enormous companies. Now, again, it's not the appeal to authority just because a Fortune 500 company uses it, therefore it's good. And where I'm going with my question is, large companies, once you get past a certain there's a tipping point, and once you get past it, there will just be bureaucracy, there will just be meetings, it's just inescapable. We've all worked for big companies. Now, if you're in a situation like that, you're a Fortune 500 company, you have to have meetings, there will be some bureaucracy. What are some steps that could be taken to redirect that attention that is otherwise wasted with an S&OP process?
So first, it doesn't have to be that way. In the sense that I have met some large companies that decided to just terminate their S&OP division entirely. Nothing bad happened. That's it. I mean, at some point, that's, again, what does a surgeon replace a cancer with? Nothing. If you excise a tumor, you don't put anything in its place, and it just works better. So first, I know it's difficult to hear, but literally, when you have like a pointless bureaucracy, the best thing that you can do is just stop. Just and the thing is, people always think of additive solution where you add stuff. And the larger the company, the more pronounced it tends to be. People think in terms of additive solution, but what about subtractive solution? You just cease to do something, and everything is well, and everything is fine. You see, the thing is, again, I've seen a lot of large companies where when I was discussing with the plant manager, I was saying, okay, there is this S&OP process that produces targets. What do you do with that? I just press delete. And the typical answer is, I get the mail, every quarter, I just press delete, and you know what, job's done. And anyway, when I want to do my planning for production, I do my own extraction through the ERP, and I crunch my own numbers, and I factor my own stuff, and I just do what is reasonable from a production purposes, and where people are quite happy with the quality of service that we have. So we're good. You see, that's the sort of things where I say it's absolutely pointless, and literally you can remove that. So my first suggestion would be just remove that, and yes, there will be a lot of people screaming because they think that, that's the problem, is that when you're a cog, you have a lot of people that just are cogs and they don't see the parts. But you realize that those sort of things can be just entirely be removed, and it will not prevent the company from operating. So my message, that's really a message to CEO, is that don't be scared by the idea of just removing that. Nothing bad will happen. Nothing. And by the way, I've seen a few CEOs do that, just remove entirely this division. Everything was fine. Now, so that's the thing, because again, the problem is that it is broken by design. There will be no, you can't salvage that. The problem is that your mission, it's a mission statement that comes with S&OP, is the deliverables are this one forecast for the company. This is the deliverable. This is what is hard-coded into this division. So this is just wrong, and that's the question, is that how can I improve my fax machine to become an email? There is no upgrade path from fax machine to email. At some point, you just have to take your fax machine and throw it to the garbage bin. There is no. That's if you think that you can turn a fax machine into an email system. And by the way, some people did that. There was, at some point, 20 years ago, where some fax machine had options to actually send a mail based on the fax. But, that's complete nonsense. That's complete nonsense. You don't want to, because that's literally what I've seen some people doing that for a few years. That was, people would write an email in Microsoft Word, print it, and then use a fax machine to send the email to someone. That doesn't make any sense. And yes, it was slow. I've seen companies do that for a couple of years. But then at some point, it just people realize that the only thing that there is to be done is just get rid of the fax machine, let people compose their mail in Outlook, and be done with it. And that's the same for S&OP. I would say S&OP is just like fax machine. This is a solution that made sense at the point of time, because the technology, that was the best that you could think of in terms of technology. But fast forward, it is not something that makes sense. And so if your question is, how can you improve your fax machine? Or you just can't. It is a technological dead end. It's a dead end in terms of paradigm as well.
Well, And my last question then, because we've looked at the solution from the perspective of the CEO, but for the people, and let's say the well-intentioned people who don't sandbag, the well-intentioned people who have specialized in S&OP, not the vendors, just people who've worked, specialized, they're diligent, they're dedicated, they want to make the company better. That disappears. What next? What upskilling should be done, or what's the pivot from there?
First, people realize, okay, as I said, the problem statement, coordination needs to happen, and it requires information for that. That's the thing. Information has to flow, and the information is flowing badly. That's the thing. And when people say badly, I don't mean some sort of fancy stuff like, oh, we speak and they don't listen. Mm-hmm. No, I'm something like super mundane, like I want to produce a sales report of what has been sold over the last 12 months, and all I get from my BI report is garbage.
Noise to signal, basically.
Yeah, I mean, no, not even noise. Garbage in the sense of it's broken, the software is not working. They're just basic problems. Information has to flow, but the producing the report takes hours because the piece of enterprise software is garbage, and so producing a report takes hours. Or the numbers are wrong because there was an update for the ERP and all the numbers are now incorrect. Or you see plenty of things, super basic things. So I would say if you want to make to find solution, it's just go back to the initial problem statement. People need to be able to access the information, and I'm not saying something like super fancy, just the transactional information. Can all people access the transactional information that they need in ways that are like super convenient? If not, then you need to make this to happen. Then make sure that the information is actually integrated in one place. The problem is not the lack of that digitalization. Large companies are digitalized. The problem is that usually there is not like one ERP. There are 4 of them or 4 systems. And so people want to say, for example, let's say basic questions. You want to know how much stock do we have of this product? It's a very simple question. And so you would like to know for every single SKU that you have, let's say 100,000 or more, how much do you have in stock? And most companies are not able to answer this question. Not without a lot of efforts. I know that because at Lokad, when we start initiatives, usually take us weeks to get this information correct. And because the information is like in 4 systems. There is the ERP, the WMS, there is partners, there is stock that is in transit that needs to be taken into account. There are stocks that is reserved. There might be backlog that is only found in the CRM. So there might be like half a dozen systems. And if you want to answer a question as basic as how much stock do we have, it is a lot of information that is not easily accessible. So I would say, again, if we go back to the basic, we have the problem of making this coordination happen. Well, it needs an access to the information, and it's through software, and you have to make sure that the base layer of the software is done correctly so that this information can be just accessed properly by all the parties that need that. So I would say if you're an S&OP if you're an S&OP specialist, I would say convert your team into a data lake team. That would be a message. Data lake is just all the basic information of the company needs to be accessible in a programmatic form to everybody. So this is not BI, because again, the problem with BI is that people think BI, the mindset is I give you numbers for human consumption. But the thing is, again, bandwidth, you cannot, even if you can speak only maybe, you can absorb by reading probably an order of magnitude more information than what you can speak. So you can read much faster than what you can speak. So you can expose people to a lot of information, to a little more information by just presenting those numbers on the screen through tables. But realistically, people can't do much for that. So I would say the difference between a BI team and a data lake is that the data lake perspective is you want to make the data available so that people can work with the data with tools. So you see, that's a very big difference. A BI, you present a screen, and it's supposed to be someone who just read those numbers. A data lake is you let people extract a 1 million line Excel spreadsheet and they just run their macros on top of it. You know, the mindset is if I give you a table, I'm going to give you a big extract with everything, and then you're going to potentially in Excel, but run the macros that you have engineered on top of that to do whatever calculation you're interested in. But if I give you a spreadsheet, it is not intended as a human will read the data line by line. They are more likely do a calculation in Excel or something and then be done with it.
All right. Well, Joannes, thank you. I don't have any more questions. You've covered everything in quite a bit of detail. So thank you very much for your time. And thank you very much for watching. We'll see you next time.